Hello. So sorry. Hello and welcome to the session From Pledges to People, Delivering Resilience Does Work. My name is Marcia Toledo and I'm Director for Adaptation and Resilience with the Climate High Level Champions. It's my pleasure to share with you the results of the Race to Resilience campaign and to introduce this session today that will bring high why it's important to bring people at the center of climate action, how the Race to Resilience is advancing that, but as well how other actors, stakeholders, institutions are as well recognizing the opportunity when nature solutions impact people, the opportunity when technology improve the access of information or responses to people, but as well the opportunities for access to finance, improve capacity building, and improve collaboration among multiple actors. This session today is especially responding to the letter 5 of the COP30 presidency that brings people at the center of climate action, but as well the letter number 8, which highlighted the opportunity of advancing adaptation. The COP presidency has a name. This is the COP of adaptation, the COP of adaptation, finance, mobilization, and implementation. We're very keen to see that happening. And as part of that, what we've been bringing to this COP with the Race to Resilience was the results after 4 years of collective action. So multiple partners getting together. So we have about 40 plus partners working with 1,700 members in 165 countries that are bringing collective results of after the implementation of solutions that could be mangrove restoration, could be watershed investments on green solutions, or early warning systems, or insurance for helping coastal communities resolve risks of flooding or other challenges. The collective results have been able to confirm that we have almost 500 million people increasing resilience as a product of solutions, about 4 billion adaptation finance mobilized and accessed by those communities for that locally led action in about 14 million of hectares of nature improved, better preserved, and better managed. That's what the spirit of this session aims to bring. Clarity and the connection on the why we have people at the center, but also as well what we need to do, because it does not necessarily we have one method to calculate, for example, the impacts on people from different solutions, or we have incredible still gaps in regards of scaling and advancing those solutions. So what is missing? And that's the spirit of the COP30 action agenda. The COP30 action agenda is very much placed to respond and help deliver the global stocktake, which focus on identifying what is our opportunity, what are the targets on energy or on nature or on food systems or on human and social development, especially as well adaptation finance. So the action agenda structured around those 6 axes are helping to respond. How are we addressing those barriers, those challenges, but as well, what are the levers? And in the Race to Resilience, we have brought all the work that has been mobilized entirely, we embedded it in the action agenda, and specifically to that purpose, to help showcase progress, help bring the lenses of people increasing resilience, and also contribute with the lessons learned and the methodology that has helped curate all that information. We have a matrix framework that is people-centric, very much supported by the Technical Secretariat, which is formed by the Center for Research and Resilience from the University of Chile. That center and the team that supports the Race to Resilience counts with IPCC other leads in regards of adaptation science, so that we can secure that the information shared from the campaign is strong, with a solid analysis and with back robust science framework. That is very critical, because when we deal with people and when we deal with climate action, we want to be as strong and solid as possible. That's why we will hear today perspective from researchers, perspective from actors that are making decisions and that are projecting how their actions will benefit people. We want to be practical. In the COP of implementation, that's exactly what we need to really be elevating, how those actions are touching the ground and also how that affects people. And in the spirit of the action agenda, we're also looking for the next phase. So the campaign completed, let's say, the first cycle, from pledges to plan, and this year bringing the delivery. And with the action agenda, during the next 5 years of the action agenda, the campaign is looking to work with other actors and be catalytical in bringing their metrics framework, the lessons learned, capacity, or exchanges that can actually address the common barriers we have to accelerate people increasing resilience across. So this is critical because people does not fall in one axis. Access to energy is critical, like benefits from nature, or food systems that are enabling resilient farmers, or health systems and resilience actions that are enhancing our social and human development opportunities. And as well, in the final axis, which relates to finance, is not only the finance flows, but also the finance axis. So we really look forward to have a very interesting conversation. We have wonderful panels and great as well closing speaker that can help us again recognize the opportunity, identify how we can advance even faster to address the barriers and enhance the levers, and especially move forward to when we speak and advance climate adaptation, we always also respond, elevate, and position the opportunity for people. Thank you. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Daniela. Daniela Palma is the climate tracker lead for the Climate Champions team, and she's going to be the moderator of the two sessions. Thank you.
Is it on? Testing. Can you hear me? Testing. Okay, there we go. Hi everyone. Thank you, Marcia, for that introduction and for your insights. Yeah, my name is Daniela Palma. I'm going to be the moderator for today. So it's my pleasure, bringing this conversation forward regarding moving from pledges to people and delivering resilience that really works. It's a pleasure to step in now as we turn to our first panel discussion to bridge the lived experiences with the systems that shape resilience at scale. Our first panel discussion will be focusing from communities to systems, strengthening people-centered resilience pathways. We'll explore how locally led adaptation efforts can really inform and transform national policies, financing structures, and global frameworks. So it's my pleasure to welcome our first speaker today in our panel, which is Claire Shakya, who's the Global Managing Director of Climate at the Nature Conservancy. If you can please join us on the stage. Great. And then we'll also bring our next panelist, Albert Salamanca, Head of Secretariat at Adaptation Resilience Alliance. Finally, I'd like to welcome Diosmar Lilo from Yaleta University. Great, thank resilience and adaptation. Great. So as Marcia was mentioning earlier, there's so many global action agenda, with the global action agenda, COP30 presidency focus, and the race to resilience, we've seen quite some examples of global effort to bring more focus on adaptation and resilience. But it's really important for us today to really be able to talk to other actors in this space who are also working on adaptation and resilience, and really think about how you're catalyzing um, across multiple sectors and also across multiple actors. So with that, I'd like to kick us off with the first question to Claire. Claire, TNC is part of the Amazon Alliance and other initiatives that bring together nature adaptation action. How have nature-based solutions delivered both nature and people-centered adaptation for vulnerable communities from your experience?
Thank you so much. So when I've been working on climate for a while now, and when you look at a whole range of options in a landscape or in a government, and you start to work through with local communities about what their priorities are, with local governments, with the NGOs, with all the different non-state actors at that local level, the priorities that they always set as the least regret, the low regret options, or the most cost-effective options, are the nature-based solutions. And the reason for that is because they're flexible. So even if your future is, you're not sure whether it's just going to get hot, whether it's going to get hot and drier, whether you're going to have more flooding, if you start to improve your watersheds, you're managing all of those risks at the same time. So for that reason, and because they're cost effective, and because communities don't separate climate and nature crises, we find that they're really prioritized. And that's true in the global north. It's true for the London adaptation strategy, for the Netherlands, for Bangladesh, for you name it. It's true globally. And when you're looking at wetlands, floodplains, the forests or watersheds, the opportunity to cool, to slow runoff, to store water, to improve aqua recharge can all happen at the same time. So there's a huge opportunity here, and it's preferred when you look at what communities are prioritizing. So the Amazon Alliance is aiming to bring together partners from indigenous peoples, from the IFRC, the Red Cross Network, and really center people and their generational knowledge to understand how best available climate science, technical know-how can be applied to improve and expand their approaches to tackling the droughts, the wildfires, the heat, and so on. And the opportunity is to be because we're working with IFRC, we're looking at people that are used to doing short-term responses in humanitarian contexts, alongside indigenous peoples who have these long-term visions for the bioeconomy and how they want to thrive in harmony with nature. So it feels to us that we're not only bringing together a lot of different types of actors, the local governments, the indigenous networks, but also the sort of short-term, immediate response. How do you get, if there's going to be a forest fire, how do you get on top of that as quickly as possible so it does as little damage as possible? So we're excited about this as a strategy. It is very new and young, but it's building on a lot of what we've learned about what communities really want in thriving in the long term in a climate change world.
Thank you, Claire. That's very exciting to hear and to see how, the Amazon Alliance is really focused on working with the people locally to be able to bring the solutions to those same people in those same communities, and thinking about how nature-based solutions can really offer that flexibility, whether it's the short-term or long-term solutions they're looking for. Great, thank you. And now we turn over to you, Albert. Based on your experience at the Adaptation Research Alliance, it'd be great to learn about how you see researchers and policymakers really align around metrics that reflect real improvements in people's resilience.
Thanks a lot, Daniela, for the question. But first, let me just introduce about the Adaptation Research Alliance. So it's a global coalition of at least 280 members composed of researchers, donors, institutes, civil society organization, working towards accelerating and scaling action-oriented research. And our key mission is enabling or amplifying the voices of scholars and researchers from the Global South. So that's the Adaptation Research Alliance. So with regards to the question that you have asked, I think it's an interesting question because if some of you have been to the negotiation on a global goal of adaptation just now at 11 to 1 o'clock, it's a stalemate. And the language are really quite serious with regards to sort of the disconnect between the researchers or the evaluation experts, M&E experts who developed the indicators or who suggested the indicators, and then the parties who are actually making decisions on those indicators, and of course, the communities also, because presumably the parties are actually arguing that those indicators do not represent communities. So some of the language, for example, that they're saying is that indicators shouldn't be punitive, shouldn't be the basis of reporting, shouldn't be the basis of comparison, and there's just sort of there's very strong emotions around how indicators could be used against them. So I think the first answer to your question is that the problem that we have encountered right now is, I think, because we are fragmenting the process. So the technical expert developed the indicators. So remember, it started with 10,000 indicators to 400 to 100 now. And yet, even at 100, they couldn't argue, because these indicators were actually given to the parties and say, you make a decisions to these indicators. So that's one. So, and then the other part is that I think we really need researchers and policymakers to begin to look at the lived realities of communities. Because as what we have said, we've relied so much on predefined frameworks or predefined indicators. And then we also need metrics to speak to the daily experiences of people and capture whether people are safer, they're more secure, and better able to shape their own futures. In other words, they have to see their lives in those indicators, because if those indicators are actually alien to them, they didn't see, the connection. And then the alignment should come from evidence or knowledge that recognize social, cultural, and relational dimensions of resilience. Because for as long as communities wouldn't see value in all those indicators of resilience, I don't think they're going to support them. So what this means is that we need to co-design metrics with communities, local governments, and implementing partners. And then we need to ground these indicators with households and local institutions so that they create meaningful change. So even if these indicators might not be too complicated from a research point of view, but if these indicators mean something for these communities, then we should support them. And then finally, for policymakers, to use the metrics as tools for learning and improvement and not just reporting. Because I think the worry is just now, the focus so much is just how to report on those indicators. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. That's such a very important point, and we're seeing that now with such a back and forth on aligning on any indicators and metrics for reporting. But we need to remember that the main purpose is to make sure that these are also relevant for the communities that are going to help us be able to measure against those and be able to actually tell their story of what's happening on the ground regarding adaptation and resilience and where there's gaps. So thanks, Albert. That's a very good point. Great. Now we move on to you, Diosmar. Based on your research at Zelaya, what are the impacts and effects of urban inequalities? And what are the true paths to equitable climate adaptation?
Hola.
Sorry, are you able to
Okay.
hear?
Buenas tardes. Yo voy a hablar en español. ¿Ok? Ok? Yo voy a hablar español y español.
Eh,
Ok? Gracias, buenas tardes a todos. Daniel,
I'll go ahead and translate some of this for Diosmar. He'll be speaking
agradeço ao
Spanish.
equipo do Climate Champion por a oportunidade e a participação em diálogo.
Okay. I'd like to thank the high-level champions for this opportunity to come speak with you today.
Como se ha apresentado, sou Diosmar Filho, investigador sênior da Associação de Investigação em Aleta.
As introduced, I am Diosmar Filo, a senior researcher at the Ayaleta Research Association, where I lead the studies and research
Donde dirijo estudos de la investigación sobre ordenamiento territorial y desigualdades previas,
where I lead the research on land use planning and pre-existing inequalities,
para la formulación de las estrategias de implementación de la adaptación climática como una forma de desarrollo.
This research focuses on formulating strategies for implementing climate adaptation as a form of development in the territories of science.
En los territorios de las ciencias, como denominamos las regiones norte y noroeste del Brasil.
As well as in the north and northeast regions of Brazil.
No Brasil. Regiões formadas por 2.242 municípios,
These regions comprise of 2,244 municipalities.
41% de los municipios brasileños,
Representing 41% of all Brazilian municipalities.
su população residente representa 35% da população nacional do Brasil.
Their resident population represents 35% of the national population of Brazil,
72 milhões de pessoas.
with 72 million people.
Desde 16 milhões de pessoas vivendo em aglomerados subnormais, hoje denominados de comunidades urbanas e favelas.
Yeah. The Brazilian consensus recorded 16.39 million people living in informal settlements, now called urban communities and favelas.
Este universo onde vamos o desenvolvimento das capacidades técnicas e científicas como mecanismo de fomento para elevar capacidades locais.
It is with this framework that we see the development of technical and scientific capabilities as mechanisms for fostering and enhancing local capacities.
Em cidades medianas e pequenas do sul global.
In small and medium-sized cities in the global south.
Estamos em processo de la urbanização das pessoas.
We are in the process of urbanization.
Este é ciclo e as soluções basadas em la natureza são caminho.
We are in this cycle, nature-based solutions are one path.
Pero la forma será mirar os territórios urbanos e suas humanidades.
But the way forward will be to view urban territories through the lens of their humanities.
O panorama apresento poderia ser muito mais grave se não houvesse implementado políticas
These scenarios I present could be much more serious if people-centered public policies had not been implemented.
Políticas públicas pensadas nas pessoas nos últimos 20 anos nas regiões noroeste do Brasil.
If they had not been implemented in the last 20 years in the northeast region of Brazil.
Esta região desenvolveu dos maiores programas públicos de invenção de la poderia chamar soluções baseadas em la cidadania.
In this region, one of the largest public investment programs in what we might call citizenship-based solutions.
Programa de 1 milhão de cisternas
It's a 1 million cisterns program
que garante acesso à água, à educação,
that has been developed guaranteeing access to water and education,
ampliada a produção agrícola,
expanding agriculture production,
agrícola e a geração de emprego e a redução das desigualdades e mitigar os efeitos das secas e as sequências de alguns momentos durante os últimos 5 anos.
increasing food availability in the cities, generating employment, and reducing inequalities by mitigating the impacts and effects of droughts that sometimes last up to 5 years.
Hoje em dia, as desenvolve 161 tecnologia para ampliar a convivência com as regiões mais afetadas pelo aumento da aridez e o avanço da desertificação.
Today, 161 technologies have already been developed to improve coexistence in one of the regions most affected by increasing aridity and advancing desertification.
Deste modo, considero as tecnologias como o milhão de cisternas, é considerar a habitação como uma forma de desenvolvimento e garantir a resiliência em las cidades. Estes é pensar em pessoas como centro em condições de vida. É finale.
Okay. Therefore, considering technologies like the million cisterns means considering adaptation as a form of development and ensuring resilience in cities. This means putting people at the center, focusing on their living conditions. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Diosmar. That's very good. And
Thank
also-
you, Dani.
Thank you. Very great to hear about the efforts and the work and how technology is also being used within its own citizens at the local level to help bring those solutions and understand, how implementation really happens at the local level. Great. Let me just take a look at the time. We're good on time. Okay, I think we can have another round of questions, which we'll bring it back to Claire. So Claire, we've talked about what's been done, what the initiatives, research institutes, and what policy and researchers are doing at the global level to work on adaptation and resilience. But now let's think about, what we're planning towards or what you've seen being planned for the future. What are maybe some of the barriers and opportunities in nature-based solutions to track progress of adaptation benefits?
So within adaptation, it's been one of those areas that's so hard to track. And what you were saying, I'm really just going to repeat, so I'll try and be quick. But there are so many different ways to look at how do you understand these processes. Now, when you're looking at the very specific nature-based solutions, it's quite easy to model the change in biophysical risk with different degrees of climate impact. And so we've got, for example, a resilience methodology that's out being finalized at the moment. That's all about providing a means by which governments can say, with this amount of mangrove, I am protecting this amount of infrastructure, urban activity, economic activity, etc. And numbers of people that are also having some level of protection. What is much harder is when you begin to look at what the impacts are in terms of social and cultural dimensions, which is exactly what you were saying. So super easy for us to say, with this amount of mangrove, you have protected this amount of coast from storm surges to this amount with this amount of with wind, for example. Not hard. It's still got to be agreed, but we're trying to build a sort of common methodology for doing that. But much harder really to start to say, of all of those people, some people will have, there are underlying drivers of vulnerability that some people will still not benefit from that mangrove because they're sitting in an area that just is outside of where the sort of urban infrastructure protection lies, or because they're just so poor, their dwelling is actually below the level of, even a high tide. So there's all sorts of aspects that are around how we organize ourselves socially that make it much harder to say what's the intensity of value for any given household. And what we're often finding is that in richer countries, it's very easy for a government to say, well, this number of households have been protected, but actually the amount of value that is being protected often goes up in richer areas, and it sounds like you're doing more, you're having bigger bang for your buck in a rich area than in a poor area. And we have to make sure that as we develop our metrics, we're not translating that problem from the UK, the US, Europe to other countries. So I think it's super important that we really pay attention to the social dynamics around what we're trying to achieve in adaptation, and ensure that we're aiming to build social transformation and not actually just to sort of shore up the inequalities that we face today.
Thank you, Claire. That's a very good point. And yeah, to your point, I just saw a panel yesterday where they talked about the Amazon fire last year and how they've tried to quantify it. But I think one of the missing pieces, right, was thinking about what is the social impact. So really thinking about how you can measure that and consider that into your total tracking and reporting areas, but thinking really beyond the physical reach. How are these nature-based solutions really helping, or in some cases maybe not helping the communities? Great, thanks, Claire. Great. So Albert, back to you. Based on what you've seen also with the Adaptation Resilience Alliance and elsewhere, which partnerships or models have proven most effective in bridging research insights with implementation on the ground?
Thanks. Before coming here, I thought I knew the answer for that one, but I think I have a better answer based on the interactions, the many interactions I had with friends, colleagues, and other partners during the last 2 weeks. In fact, yesterday we had a session at the Global South House together with different community philanthropies, and in terms of how they provide funding for indigenous peoples. And that conversation actually enriched my understanding with regards to partnership. So what I'll do is maybe share some of the ideas that were discussed in that particular forum, because to me that's what partnership is all about. So first is that partnerships that center community knowledge and decision making tend to be the most effective. So a lot of partners yesterday actually shared this very idea, particularly when you deal with vulnerable groups and communities, for example, indigenous peoples. And then models that foster long-term relationships among local governments, civil society, and researchers, rather than relying on short project cycles, create the trust necessary for evidence to inform action. Again, yesterday there were a lot of discussions about how do we really enable trust and why trust is really fundamental to effective partnership. And then the third one is that collaborative approaches such as alliances, community labs, climate field schools, co-creation, enable research findings to inform decisions while also respecting local priorities. And then trust-based philanthropy. So there was a big discussions even at the Resilience Hub on trust-based philanthropy. And catalytic grants also help bridge the gap between research and implementation by reducing bureaucratic barriers and enabling communities to test and refine solutions. And finally, we need partnership to span scale, so from the local to the regional to the national to the global, for really actions to happen. So a form of partnership that's sort of uniscalar is not as effective as when you actually cuts across the various scales, because learning and trust building could occur in that dimension. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Albert. That's a very good point. And I would say, Marcia mentioned earlier the COP30 action agenda, and I think that's one of the examples that we've started seeing of how partnerships are starting to get built, right, across, and trying to think about the long-term trust, but also the models that will help for the long-term relationships as we continue to work on adaptation and resilience. So I think it's great to hear that, that these are some of the key elements that we need to see as we continue developing in climate action and really thinking about the next steps for adaptation and resilience. Great. Thank you, Albert. So, Diosmar, we'll bring it back to you for our last question. So based on your experience, what that governance and cooperation systems need to be recognized to strengthen adaptation as a form of urban development.
Se yo hablar espanhol e speak English, is necessário DJ. I speak in espanhol e eu traduzo, ok? Penso que é preciso pensar o DJ, pensar em indicadores para DJ, para
It's a bit hard for me to hear. I'll scoot towards you. It's okay. I'll scoot here. It's a bit hard for me to hear.
é preciso indicadores para DJ, é preciso indicadores para DJ,
It's precisely important
indicador
for indicators
DJ,
of the GGA
ok? Porque é importante esta observação.
because this is an important observation.
Esta é uma ação que tem efeito positivo frente aos estudos que indicam.
This is an important
Eu encaminhei para
ah,
você.
this is an important this is an important this is an action that has a positive effect on the studies that we see indicating
Indica em los próximos 50 anos a população urbana poderia representar mais de 58% da população global.
it's indicating that in the next 50 years the urban population could represent more than 58% of the world's population according to the UN Habitat.
Se não implementamos as ambições das NDCs,
And that if we do not implement the ambitions of the NDCs,
teremos uma temperatura média do planeta de 2 graus Celsius em 2050.
we will have a global average temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius by 2050.
Então, a adaptação é uma implementação para cuidar das pessoas.
In that case, adaptation and implementation is critical
As pessoas em las cidades.
for people and the cities.
Então, a adaptação como desenrolo
And all of adaptation as it's developed,
é o grande desafio
it's a big challenge.
e a grande forma de lá cuidar de mais de 50% da população global.
But a good way of being able to help the 50% of the population.
Este diálogo é muito importante,
This dialogue is very important.
que se não queremos mundo de 2.0 graus Celsius,
If we do not want a world of 2 degrees Celsius,
temos lá a responsabilidade de cuidar de 58% das pessoas global.
then we have to show that we care of the 58% of the people globally.
Então, as pessoas é lá o centro.
The people are the center.
Graças.
Thank you.
Graças, Daniel.
No worries. Great. Well, thank you for discussing. It's very important to really think about. We often hear the 2% degrees, the 2 degrees Celsius increasing, but you really don't hear about how many people that's going to affect. So it's very important to really bring that back to think about who is going to be affected by that the most, which is us. So we want to make sure that we have that at the center. Well, thank you to all of our panelists for this great conversation. And I'd like to now just ask everyone to help me give them a round of applause for their participation. Great, thank you. So I'll go ahead and just switch over to this side now. As we go ahead and welcome our second panel group now. We've heard from our first panel though, on the various ways that communities are really helping shape and transform the systems that are already implemented. So that's great to hear. But now we'd like to kind of take a step back and think of it now to bring our second panel and discuss now how enabling people centric resilience through youth, science, and policy and finance is going to help us really think about international perspectives and the grassroots experiences that they bring to the table. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and welcome our first panelist, Elena Olmos from Generación Clima Spanish Youth Delegate and from the University of Alicante, Spain. Please join me on the stage. Yeah, feel free to take a seat anywhere. Great. Thanks, Elena. And next, we have Ratna Pavitra, Head of Grants Program at Sanhana Institute in Indonesia. And last but certainly not least, we have JB Gamboa, Assistant Director for Policy and Governance at Manila Observatory in the Philippines. Great. Thank you all so much for joining us here today at COP30 to really bring this conversation of what needs to happen to go from pledges to people and thinking about adaptation and resilience at work. Let's go ahead and get started. Why not? With the first question for Elena, actually. Elena, I'd like to start with you to think, as we explore what truly people-centered and youth-centered approach to adaptation looks like, from your experience in Spain and internationally, what does a truly people-centered and youth-centered adaptation strategy look like?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Thanks for having me. So for me, people-centered and youth-centered strategy is something that focuses on bringing, like improving people's life. I think often when we think about adaptation, we consider like great infrastructure, technology, but I think the focus should be also, as it was mentioned in the previous panel, on how this can also include nature-based solutions and other kind of adaptation mechanisms that are also innovative and that also make sure that people is also listening. So for example, like ecosystem-based adaptation and so on, I think already has an important role on including people's perspective into the adaptation practices. I believe that it's important because I work with international project management and also as a I've been involved in different youth forums, and there I realized that local communities already have a strong knowledge on what are the needs that they have, what are the vulnerabilities, and I think it's important that that knowledge is recognized and that there is a connection on that knowledge on how to implement it into science, policy, and how to look for finance. And then a youth-centered approach, I think, is one that gives a space to young people. I believe that many young people already have, it's collaborating often with like local communities, with governments and so on. And I think it's also important to recognize informal networks. So for example, here I want to talk about something of my experience. When I was in my second years of my degree, I started looking for ways on kind of like alternative ways on how to be more sustainable, and I discovered about permaculture, and there I was really I don't know, for me it was really a discovery that the sustainability was not only happening at an institutional side, but how it was important to recognize what it was doing in the periphery, so to say. So permaculture for me was really something that opened my eyes, because I got to connect with practitioners, with networks, with eco-villages. I ultimately engaged in an eco-village called Permatopia in Denmark, and there I did sort of an ethnography. And it was really interesting for me because I saw how this concept kind of was really relevant. In the end, I did my thesis about it, but the three concepts that I wanted to bring here and that I think made me really titled my thesis as Permaculture Contributing to Sustainable Development by Creating Resilient Communities, was that this concept, and I think similar concepts that are going to be discussed here, brought together, for example, the idea of design system. So this system was based on what was in the context. It was analyzing what was in the context and then bringing solutions. And I think this is really important. This is something that is recognized by ecosystem-based adaptation. It's also recognized by, for example, ecological restoration. But I think it's also important to listen to the communities, and that's key in this concept. Then, secondly, and something that I really loved about it was that it was also bringing a way of living, so to say, like a philosophy, a culture. I believe that sustainable development cannot only be done by top down. It cannot. It needs to have like a revolution. It needs to be based on bottom up approaches, and I think it has to be linked to sort of a philosophy or a culture. I don't know how to say it, but I think that this idea of having like some people, some experts talk about the necessity of integrating a fourth dimension for sustainable development, and that this fourth dimension should be culture. I don't know if I see it so much as a fourth dimension, but I think I see it more as a core, something like to impulse the other three dimensions, so social, economic, and environmental. And I believe these kind of like community-based and approaches have this potential to be this impulse, and I think that that should be highlighted. And then thirdly, I think it's really important here. Also, we are thinking about the race to resilience, the idea of international networks, the idea of things happening already, like actions happening in different like peripheries in different municipalities, local communities. And I think it's important to connect these things happening in different places to kind of do like these hubs and connect it as nodes of groups, and bring like that knowledge between different groups and work together. I ultimately want to say that I think it's important, this concept of networks, because nature works with networks, and networks are super important for resilience, because when you have something happening at a different level, if one thing kind of fails, you still have so many other things happening, and it wouldn't like break up. When there's all systemic, if one thing kind of falls, then everything can fall down. And yes, I think that it's important that we recognize that we recognize the power of communities to decide. And yes, as the founder of permaculture said, I think it's important that we don't focus only on copying what is working in other places, but that we rather analyze what is needed in each environment, and we tailor solutions for each environment and each community. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Elena. Great way to really showcase the personal examples of how you're seeing youth take front and center role in taking action on adaptation resilience within your community, but also thinking about how to build those networks outside of your community to kind of bring that support when needed, but ultimately really focusing on the fact that your community and your culture is going to really help define what are the solutions that are needed. So thank you. Great. Now we move to Ratna. Ratna, we just heard from Elena on some great examples on that showcase the youth-centered approaches to adaptation. For you, coming from Sana Institute and thinking more on the finance side, what does equitable access to adaptation finance look like in practice, particularly for grassroots organizations in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here, speaking at this session. So what I think about equitable access to adaptation finance means funding channels directly and simplify to the local actors who are the best positioned to design and implement the resilience project themselves. So in practice, this means moving away from the more complex and bureaucratic process that currently favored by the large donor or more like a large organizations, and then simplify means simplify the application process. This means that to reduce the complexity, to omit or reduce the technical jargon that the community usually doesn't really understand what that means, and then direct funding windows, establishing a dedicated funding to the community that local community could access, local community could access directly, and also given the decision-making process for them to decide what they could do to fight against this climate change. And usually, the community already know what to do. They already know what they needs to do to utilize the knowledge within the community itself, and because usually they also understand what they do need, what they need to be adaptive in the climate change. And of course, most of the time, the challenge is that they do not have the capacity of having this complex reporting. So this means funds like Somnana will need to provide accompaniment and capacity building to the community to answer to this reporting, and also giving them accompany them to tell the stories, because they're there and they don't know what to do, but most of the time they do not have access to this finance.
Thank you, Ratna. I think that's very important and also very key, right? We know that these grassroots organizations often have the solutions. They just often need that extra capacity building and support to be able to get them the right finance that they need and bring about better adaptation and resilience. Great, thank you. Javi, now if I can turn to you. As the Assistant Director for Policy and Governance at the Manila Observatory, how can adaptation-centered and just transition pathways be integrated into NDCs, national adaptation plans, and local development plans in the Philippines and regionally?
Good afternoon. So I'm speaking from the side of those working with policy, governance, and science. So just transition is often related or linked to mitigation. But increasingly, we have been advocating for a just transition that also considers adaptation and resilience. And I'm happy to give an update to those present here that in the negotiations happening right now in the Just Transition Work Program, the parties are quite aligned that adaptation and climate resilience are integral to just transition pathways. So our position is that if we are talking about just transitions, that adaptation must be in the center of this, especially coming from a global south perspective and a climate vulnerable country perspective, because while we look at the different options of the just transition pathways, let's say in energy transition, transport, urban systems, not all of these strategies that cut down greenhouse gas emissions are actually consistent or aligned with increasing resilience or adaptation. Actually, on the ground, there are some strategies, if implemented poorly, they could exacerbate the vulnerabilities to climate change of peoples, communities, of stakeholders, especially those in the grassroots. So we are developing this integrated framework of adaptation, just transition, and even loss and damage in an integrated planning for LDCs, for national and local climate plans, so that we can integrate and identify strategies that are actually responsive to the needs of the people from the ground, and not only found in some textbook or some report in terms of strategies, truly responsive of the needs of the people on the ground, in the ground, and consistent with science. Okay? We see this in all scientific publications, in the IPCC reports, that there is really a need for strategies that prioritize or that has mitigation and adaptation co-benefits or synergies. It's there. It's just that what's probably more appealing to, let's say, investors or to maybe even government are those that purely prioritize mitigation benefits. So, in our advocacy work in ASEAN, in the Southeast Asian region, in the Philippines, and in local governments in the Philippines, we have been trying to say that if we are to craft a just transition framework or pathway or a national determined contribution, national determined contribution commitments, it must be truly responsive of the needs of the people. And coming from a climate vulnerable country such as the Philippines, this space for adaptation and mitigation co-benefits or synergies is really wide. So I leave it here for now, and I turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Javi. That's great to hear how the Philippines is really tackling this, not only from the policy perspective, but bringing in the science to make sure that adaptation and just transition and even loss and damage, like you said, so bringing a little bit of the nature in there is really at the center of your NDCs and the strategies and the long-term idea of how do you make sure you build these to focus on what's needed for your region and for your communities. So that's great to hear. Great, and with that, I'll bring it back now to Elena for one more question. I just want to make sure of the time here again. Okay, yeah. Oh, okay. So we'll keep this one a rapid round. If you can keep your answers to 30 seconds, a minute, what's coming to your mind, that'd be great. Okay, so for Elena, let me just, 1 second. Okay. How can youth meaningfully influence institutional decision making, moving from consultations to shared governance?
Thanks. So I believe for us to have a real youth into the process, so to say, I think that there needs to be some change in the institutional architecture. I believe there are 3 things that should be in place in order to ensure that youth are really integrated in the process, and it's first continuity. I think it doesn't make sense to have our I think it's better like this. Our opinion once that the decision has already taken place, but more of involving us in how the decision is taking place. It's before and not just our opinion. Then it's also important that there's a process of co-responsibility, that we are giving a mandate, that we are giving some something to work on, not just that, as I said, it's not just to have us there as some element, but kind of that we participate in it. And then also accountability. Okay, we give recommendations, but are our recommendations taken into consideration? And finally, I think for me it's also about not just having young people in the, I don't know, in this space, in these spaces or in the decision-making spaces, in order to say, oh, we involve the young people, not just as representatives. I think it's also important that we have a role of representation, but I think it's also important that we are considered as persons, that we are trained, and that we can collaborate and we can contribute to the discussion. It's not only that we are an element of the society, but more that I think we are trained in topics that really matter in our daily life, and I think that we can contribute to it. And I think we can, I don't know, we should be called as kind of for our knowledge and expertise in the topic. That's it.
Thank you, Elena. Now, Ratna, can you share just one example where flexible community-driven funding has led to more durable, resilient outcomes?
Yeah, thank you. So I give one example of one communities that we supported in Bali. So they use this method of intermittent irrigation system We have a research on this method where when this method used, it can reduce the methane production, and also it could gain the crops can gain more like 20% additional production from this method. So it really traditional method is just like having this a traditional tools of clearing weeds, and then with these traditional tools of clearing weeds, it is proven to reduce the methane, and it's help with the climate adaptation. So we it's been there has been a research the study on this, and this is a one good example of adaptation done by the community.
Thank you, Ratna. And last one for JV. Is there one example you can tell us about how science community has better supported local governments in planning long-term adaptation?
So, in our organization, Human Observatory, we have a lot of partnerships with the different local governments in terms of risk mapping and capacity and organizing capacity building workshops for local government officials and employees, so that they can craft local climate change action plan, and not only craft one because it's required by the law, for instance, but actually integrate this or mainstream climate considerations across all of the operations of the local government. And I think one major way that the science community can support local adaptation is through climate education. So earlier or last week, we had a session on this in the ASEAN Pavilion, and the role of climate education in terms of governance, in terms of capacitating equal the communities, and for the local governments and the communities to be able to truly know what are the options, what are the possibilities in terms of adaptation, and not only rely on, let's say, national government or the international government in terms of models or best practices.
Thank you, JV. And thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today and being able to share about your experiences and your work that you've been doing. Thank you so much. Great. And with that, I'd like to now welcome Paz Gonzalez from Ethical Stocktake, who will be giving our closing remarks.
Okay, hey. Okay, thanks. I will try to keep it short because I think we are over time. Can you hear me? A little bit? Okay, thanks. Well, thanks for inviting me to this event. It was a great opportunity to hear all these insightful participations, and I was just taking a lot of notes, and I would like to share some key results, or at least what the key results were for me from my perspective. My name is Paz Gonzalez. I am part of Fundación Avina. It's a Latin American organization. We have been working this year with the Global Stocktake. We've been part of it, developing regional conversations to discuss what ethical approach it is for different groups of actors, such as recyclers, firemen, local communities from the Chaco region, scientists, so on. And I'm mentioning this because I think that many of the results and the key messages from those conversations are very well related with what our panelists were mentioning today. So first of all, I think that if we want to have adaptation measures that are effective, we definitely need to put people in the center and exercise deep listening and invite them to be part of those solutions instead of just telling them what they need to do. Um, so also another key topic that was mentioning is the importance of having priority shifts because resilience has to be defined through local perspectives, through learning through the processes that has already been implemented and learning from that and implementing those lessons learned. Also, another key topic that was mentioned in the dialogues that we implemented through the year and that was also very well mentioned today in our panel is the importance of having shifts in metrics, in indicators, not only having indicators that report activities that were implemented, but having indicators that represent communities, that represent how communities understand well-being and how communities are really involved in the decision-making processes, and how nature and science work together as well. And finally, our third topic that I would like to highlight is the importance of having narrative shifts to move from just a technical approach to adaptation to an approach that unites and joins ethics, that joins well-being, health, nature, and implementation as well. And that will lead us to structural changes. As were also mentioned in the last panel, we don't only need to have people involved once the plans or the activities have been ended, but we need to involve them in building their own future. So I think that were my words. Thanks.